everyone. Today we have our another new episode and we will discuss on the future of job. This is our 949 episode. We have our world famous speaker, Professor David Smith. He is a famous analyst and he is a wicked problem solver. So from today's topic, I'm sure our audience can learn many interesting aspects, the future of job, or future of work. Professor David Smith, what you want to discuss? This floor is open, so you can discuss.
Well, Sharif, thank you. The future jobs, the future work, very, very interesting subject as we look at the changes that have been going on and how they've really began to impact us throughout so many different parts of what we do. Uh, we know that COVID, the pandemic brought changes. We know some of the global conflicts have brought changes into the workplace and our jobs and how it's affect us. You know, the world tremendously is changing, and artificial intelligence, uh, automation, robotics, the global digitalization will make this shift really as significant as what we saw as we applied machines and other things in prior generations of agriculture and manufacturing. And yes, some jobs will be lost, but many, many others will be created. But as we've said before, and we've talked about lifelong learning, almost all these jobs will change. And the pandemic really accelerated trends that had already begun and caused many organizations to reevaluate many aspects of work and how that's going to be done and what the future of those are going to be and how they can begin to be responded to. Um, how they're being responded to. And we have seen that the economic, the health, the geopolitical trends really have created a divergent outcome in the labor markets globally. And the pandemic caused shortages in labor in many, many different areas that have contributed today. And we've seen these in uh, developing nations, low income nations, median income nations, as well as high income nations, where we're seeing much higher unemployment uh, than before the pandemic. But on the other hand, we're also seeing much higher level of jobs opening. So we have a mismatch between the jobs that are available and the jobs that people want to work and be part of. And on a individual level, like myself, you know, we begin to see that the labor market outcomes are also diverging quite a bit, and that workers who have not taken the time to educate themselves, have not taken the time to face this concept of lifelong learning, are having a harder and harder time of finding employment. And at the same time, we see uh, the types of jobs, the quality of jobs, the payment for jobs very drastically changing around the world and uh, generationally, particularly. But even looking beyond that, we're seeing there's a changing view of expectations about what jobs are, what the quality of work is, and the other elements of that. So we begin to see those types of changes becoming very persistent across the job markets and across the future of work and how it's going to play out. You know, technology adoption is going to remain a key driver of the future of jobs and work over the next 5 to 10 years. And particularly as we see the impact of the AI, the impact of the Internet of Things and all the sensors, the impacts of robotics and automation, of virtual reality, augmented reality, digital twins. All of these are going to be tremendous business transformation over this new work frontier. And just as we saw the digitalization begin to drive the whole internet era, we're going to see these dramatically change the future of work. In addition to that, with our emphasis on sustainability and the environment, you're going to see broader applications of environmental, social, and governance standards, ESG, and that will impact the future of work as well. And some of the most impactful trends are some of the macroeconomics we're seeing that are affecting jobs. And these include the raising cost of living and a slower economic growth caused by all the things we've talked about, plus the tensions around the world from geopolitical activities and the impact to drive a green transition is going to be an extremely powerful microtrend that is going to directly affect many people in the workforce and the future of their jobs. And we will see those type things create some dramatic changes globally. And the pandemic, the geopolitical divisions, and demographic demands. The fact, if we look that we have 6 generations in the workforce at the same time right now, that's going to dramatically change the makeup of jobs and the makeup of the workforce as we go forward. And that is why we're seeing so many countries, so many organizations begin to look at what are the drivers of job creation? What are the drivers of economic development? How can we use innovation and entrepreneurship to attract and attack these activities we have? And, you know, we have to begin to look at how to increase digital access to people who do not have it if we're going to expect it to drive job growth. And the creation of jobs and this innovation and truly the impact of economic development is something that has to work across all the area of the Technopolis. And we have to really understand the complexity of the problem, because the future of jobs, the future of economic development, the future of really the future of work is at a time of dramatic change right now, with many inflection points in part of it. And those inflection points will be creating some real interesting differences for us as we look at the future. So we've seen, for example, that the cloud has changed and continued to evolve. We used to talk about the cloud. We're now talking more and more about the edge of cloud. We're now talking about not just big data, but we're talking about LLMs and other things that we can target. We're talking about a concept of data just in time. We're talking about data quality and governance in ways we've never talked about. And artificial intelligence of all types, we all know without even having to be convinced that it is really changing the future of how we see the jobs happening, how companies are going to evolve, and how governments are going to evolve, and even the same with education. I love the concept that we're now using AI as part of the instruction we have in universities, because it makes so much sense on some. The human capital part is still very, very important, but we should use all the tools in our toolbox to make it a more meaningful education process. And again, particularly one as we look at the impact of lifelong learning. We also see the impact of all these digital technologies, for example, in commerce and in trade. And digital platforms and apps are where we've tremendously shifted parts of the economies globally. We're seeing more done in e-commerce than we are in brick and mortar today, and that's a significant change. Uh, we're seeing more food delivery happening versus going to restaurants and things and finding it. And that's going to continue as we see it. Uh, e-commerce and digital trade will be adopted by the well over 75% of all the businesses and adopted. And the second ranking technology is how can we use this technology to help change education and training, and how this education training can be adopted to help the workforce technologies. And almost 90% of companies are really looking at how to do this to create a workforce that is productive for the and how to begin to pull those in the list. We also know that robotics and automation of different types, power storage technology will have an impact even on the future of jobs. And if I step back and put on my futures hat, the impact of these technologies, even the impact of AI and robotics, is going to be net positive over the next decade for sure. Data analytics and environmental encryption, cybersecurity, uh, how to use sensors are all going to be some of the biggest drivers of job growth, and how then technology is applied, particularly in areas like agricultural technology, digital trade, uh, digital platforms, the future of developing applications that combined people programming and artificial intelligence programming are going to be some of the significant market leaders as we look at the labor market and the future of the jobs and work. Uh, and all but two technologies are really expected to be net job creators in the next 5 years. And the two technologies that are not are both tied to robotics, uh, classical manufacturing robotics and humanoid type of robotics, and those are the only ones where we see truly uh, uh, job creation decreasing in those areas. And we're looking at all those changes. I'm hoping that we can begin to look at this and see it as a shift. And I know that we have a lot of futures happening in those areas. But Sharif, let me take a pause. Here are some questions for you. Let me take another deep drink because I want to keep my voice going. So are there other areas you want me to explicitly touch on, or you want me to just keep going?
Yeah, Professor David Smith, thank you for your excellent analysis. You know that as we are working with different institutions, different universities in Asia Pacific, so how they can improve student quality, what type of new skills they can add, or how they can develop their research lab for engaging with the global job market.
The global job market is one where that whole concept of lifelong learning has to play. It's the concept where collaboration really has to be moved up to a new level. Just like your program shows, we're in a global environment, and it's easy to collaborate anywhere in the globe today where there is not armed conflict happening, which is restricting that type of access. Uh, And so those trends are very much there. The human machine frontier uh, has changed. And what we've seen is that businesses are introducing automation into their companies at a much slower rate than had been anticipated. And we're seeing more and more places where businesses are recognizing the importance of the human capital and how it can be done. And we're beginning to see the early stages, the early indicators of a new way to define human machine interaction. And that's so important as we begin to look at the trends that we've been talking about and how people should prepare, is that the learning and collaboration need to focus towards that. And so collaboration is not just a human to human collaboration, it's also a human to machine collaboration as well. Uh, And if you look at where we are today across all businesses, about 30% of business related tasks and manufacturing and others are performed by machines. The remaining 66 are almost 70, the remaining 70% is performed by humans. And that percentage has not changed much over the last 5 years. And we're seeing it. We're looking for machines to become more accountable in the future, and humans are an important part of that as we begin to look, for example, at the use of artificial intelligence. Um, so, what might be good, Sharif, is if let me share something just a minute. Um, Not the easiest. This
Yes,
slide that
Mr.
I'm
David,
sending you, Sharif, is a slide that is from
I
Gartner
think you want to.
Corporation. Let's display it. And this actually does a pretty good job of answering the question you asked, is that these are some of the future of work trends that Gartner has forecast for this year. And we're seeing some trends. One of them that's really interesting is something that they're calling quiet hiring, to look at new talent. Uh, a lot of the new jobs are not jobs that are posted very actively, and you see that changes. The We've heard about quiet quitting, which was one of the big headlines in 2022, and this was where employees did the bare minimum and actually cut back and ended up losing, and organizations lost skills and capabilities. And what we're seeing now with this quiet hiring trend, we're going to see more of a focus on internal talent mobility to help do promotions. And we're going to see more and more uh, emphasis put on upskilling to give new skills to existing employees, and even upskilling people who are being hired immediately. And we're going to see new approaches and looks at flexibility to try to only bring in talent as it is needed, which is what drives their number two trend on this chart, Sharif, which is the whole hybrid flexibility for hiring people in the corporations. Uh, this one is trying to find more flexibility into the work hours for employees, more flexibility in where the work is performed, how you work for those. We're seeing that already in manufacturing and financial services and healthcare and others. Uh, and companies are trying to invest in improving their employee experience as they're working. Some of these things are looking at stabilities and flexibility in work schedules, and some of them, where possible, to control their own work schedule and actually work locations. And that's a trend that started with the pandemic that has picked up speed and is dramatically accelerating as you begin to go towards the future. Then the other one is that they call it the squeeze by leader and employee expectations. And what I actually think this is you're seeing the fact that all these changes and much of the leadership and much of the senior workforce has not taken the time to educate themselves on the changes, to provide, again, that lifelong learning that we've talked about. And the changes to a hybrid work environment also has made it harder to provide a sense of purpose, flexibility, and even career options. So there has to be some redirection, has to be some re-education on how to do this. And this is both for leadership as well as for the employees themselves. So particularly as this talk about leadership in it, there has to be training to mitigate the widening managerial skill gaps. What were the successful management techniques in 2020 do not work in 2023 with all the changes. And the role of managers themselves has changed. The role of leadership is continuing to change as we look at, and the role of an employee in a dynamic corporation has changed. And I think it will continue to see it change as we go forward. You begin to see that we're beginning to pursue non-traditional candidates. And I can tell you in my companies, we're doing that dramatically right here, because we're looking at people who might not have experience in your industry, but other industries that can be brought to bear. And we're seeing employees beginning to chart nonlinear career paths. And according to Gartner, 50% of the candidates so far this year have been applying for jobs outside their current areas of expertise. And, organizations are having a hard time hiring, so they're looking broader and broader. So this pursuit of non-traditional candidates are there. We're seeing that the pandemic panics, the pandemic disruptions have opened a path to more sustainable performance. And that's where we see employees going in and looking at how to increase their physical health, their mental health, particularly as a result of the societal, economic, political terms, particularly some of the geopolitical. And while this might decrease performance and productivity some, it is one that we have to adapt to and apply resources to manage and move it through. And same Gartner study said that 82% of employees say it's important that the organization see them as the employee, not just as an employee, but a whole person. And look at things, for example, discussing opportunities. They want proactive rest. They want things to handle it. Some of the very interesting things I see is one of the trends in some of the tech business is no meeting Fridays, so that they have time. We're beginning to see a desire to more actively promote and take personal time off. And we're seeing ways to deal with trauma. One of the other trends, Sharif, that is on this that is very interesting to me, and that's a great question I'll address, is the fact that we're seeing the move towards looking at the whole concept of diversity, equality, and inclusion, which is what DEI stands for. And it's interesting. Some companies or have been actively doing it, but they're seeing employees showing resistance to the diversity, equality, and inclusion efforts because, again, same Gartner study, 42% of all the employees surveyed believe that the organizational diversity, equality, and inclusion efforts are divisive to the people in the company, and that they are making people feel alienated, or and they also represent these efforts because they see it's lowering their ability to advance, lowering their ability to be uh, promoted, and their job opportunities performance. So you're beginning to see that as a very interesting trend, because if we looked at the diversity and the equality inclusion as a trend during the 2021, that was very important there, but we're seeing the backlash now and others. We're seeing uh, the trend number 7 on the Gartner chart was that people are getting personal with employee support. And we're seeing wearables come into the place. We're seeing sensors being applied. We're seeing AI assistants being used to help uh, the employees' health, their living condition, their mental health being more productive. And we're seeing them being put in place to help prevent workplace energies and accidents. And that is one. Uh, the other couple of trends on this too, the last two are very interesting to me, is that the algorithmic bias has led to more technology and recruiting technology. And many firms use AI and machine learning in their hiring process. I know I've seen this be beneficial, but also very unbeneficial. For example, this AI in most cases penalizes your older employees, your more experienced uh, employees and stuff as they want to move to other places. And there's been a whole legislative pressure right now on privacy and how this AI is being used. What are the organizational considerations going into it, and what are the ethical implications for these practices as you look forward? And finally, the trend on this one is one that, Sharif, we've talked about on many programs, uh, is that when we look at particularly Generation Z, uh, where it's revealing a very wide erosion of social skills. The pandemic really did not help, but we're seeing the social skills dramatically change as we see more work from home, as we see more of the hybrid working environments and things. This will just continue to advance as well. And particularly Gen Z, they have, well over half of them have say their education has not prepared them to enter the workforce today, because and we're also seeing this in high schools and other schools, but this generations have missed out on developing the soft skills of working with others, a negotiating network, speaking in front of crowds, speaking on events like this, and have not developed the approaches that are required to work traditional business days and particularly in-person environments. Um, and it's affecting both the job market as well as the corporate structure and the corporate strategy. And everybody's social skills have eroded since 2020. We're seeing more burnout, exhaustion, career, and security, but we've got to look at how to address these, and how to uh, as organizations, as companies, as startups, as universities, as governments, how do we look at the future jobs, the future work? And we have an exhausted workforce. We have people who don't see where they fit in jobs. We have many job openings just waiting to be filled, and also a pressure to control costs because of the uncertainties we have. We know that we have to look more sensitive at our employees, particularly employee mental health. And how are some of the changes that we're impacting, particularly in areas like the DEI, the diversity, equality, and equation and inclusion, how are these affecting the jobs? And how can we work to change those? So, Sharif, those are some of the work trends that I think address your question actually pretty well. And I think Gartner did an excellent job in doing the surveys that were required to bring this back into focus and to help us really realize that this future of our jobs is one that we need to carefully consider and to look at how it's going to change and how we can do those. Also, the question in the comments, though, about what can you say about job loss, such as the low-tech worker and the underskill, are hard to find job, even though you're seeing salaries increase in the developing and as well as the developed countries. And and this really goes back to the concept that we have spoken often about on your program, Sri, is that we live in a time of lifelong learning. And you see that, most of my employees in my various companies, I encourage them to continue lifelong learning, to take some online courses as they can, to go and take part of boot camps, encourage them to go and do other ways to advance not only their skills and capabilities, but those of their family and others. And, I can tell you, at my age, I can see this, impactful. I uh, grew up in a time when we didn't have mobile phones, when computers were not there in active use outside of some very large mainframes and applications. The first programming I did on a computer was with paper tape, and the printouts were on paper, not on screens back then. So the impact of the technology is dramatically changed. And, I've had to reinvent my technology view of myself dozens and dozens of times during my career. And as my careers, I've changed not only different jobs, but even different industries going forward. And the job losses are there because the companies, as I said earlier on one of the Gartner findings, the companies did not invest in upskilling the workers either. So, for your question, it really is a shared responsibility between the employees, the people wanting to find jobs, and the companies in preparing their workforce, both their existing and actually new hires, and continuing to prepare them for the changing demands of the workforce and of the company. And I hope that answers your question. If not, put a clarification in the chat. I'll be more than happy to address it. So, Sharif, I think that probably is a little bit too long of an answer, but an answer to the question you asked. You have some others.
Thank you. Mr. David Smith, how you advise for develop policy for preparing the nation for future job market?
Well, I think as you look at how to prepare a nation in particular, what we've talked about is the nation has to begin to look at different ways to do their economic development. And they need to carefully look at the workers that are available and what their skills and competencies and capabilities are. They need to look at what their resources they have within the country. What areas do they have existing companies that are in growth markets? What areas do they have companies that are in declining markets or in markets that are dying? What areas do they have material resources that they can utilize? Are they in a place where they can become a logistic hub, much as like Sharif, what you see Bangladesh doing is they're re-looking at how their future of economic development works. But by the same token, it's very, very important that governments do have a role with corporations. Governments do have a role with education for the technopolis to come together and help create the environment, the training, the support networks, all of those things required for the citizens of the country to be successful and for the companies in the country to be successful. Those two go hand in hand. If your companies are not growing and expanding, they're not going to hire more employees. And companies cannot grow and expand very effectively if they cannot hire employees with the right skills, competencies, and capabilities to be successful there. And so all the parties of the Technopolis, the government, the corporations, and the education have to come together to make sure all those ingredients are appropriate to grow the capabilities in a country. Again, both from an economic development standpoint, because as you increase your economic output and your GDP, that helps on all those other functions. But companies have to be able to grow. Companies that are in dying markets need to look at how to transition, how to pivot to other markets, or understand that. And that is where innovation, entrepreneurship, some of the programs that you're leading, Dr. Sharif in Bangladesh and others, become so important because that is the transition point. That's the lifeline between balancing all those different points of the Technopolis. And I hope that
Excellent.
helps.
Mr. David Schumacher, David Smith, let's say uh, we want to minimize the gap in between developed nations and developing nations. What is your advice? How we can learn from each other, how we can collaborate, and how we can make a meaningful contribution?
That's an excellent question. And to me, the biggest gap I see in developing nations is that uh, they believe geography is a point on a map, and they work very hard to do everything they can to help enhance their region and their geographical view. Where many of jobs today, and many of the fastest growing jobs, you have to take a global perspective. And you've heard me say in your program, Dr. Sharif, that to me, geography is not about a point on the map. It's about where you feel the competency, skills, capability, and the resources to get the job done, to hire the people, to create the products, to create the markets. And many developing nations have not transitioned to that yet. In fact, that's still very common in large parts of the developed nation. They still have not come to the realization that they now live and work in a global environment and that they have to be an active participant in this collaborative global environment, or they're going to stagnate in their regions if they only focus on that. And so they have not put in place policies, regulations, training, education, uh, and even incentives from the government side to help promote this shift we're in from localism to regionalism to nationalisms to globalism. And all of those are applicable, but that is the place where particularly developing nations have not understood that transition and the importance of all of those. You know, the pandemic, uh, came back and shined a spotlight on the importance to have national manufacturing. That in many ways, prior to the pandemic, we had shifted too far in manufacturing to the least cost global options. And we saw that was wrong. So we're shifting back. That is the example, though, Sharif, of where particularly developing nations need to look at all those elements. You've heard me on the show that as a futurist, I have 6 different ways I look at the future, from being an extrapolator, pattern analyst, goal analyst, counterpuncher, an intuitor, an artist. And I look through those filters all the time when I look at the future. But countries, particularly developing nations, have to begin to do some of the same things. They have to look at the through the filters of they want the economic growth, they want the job growth, they want all those things, but they need to understand that in many instances they have to step up and be part of the bigger environment that's happening globally. It could be in the local community, to the region, to the country, to the greater region, like in the EU and others, or it could be in the total global environment. But that type of systems thinking is very, very important for the emerging countries, and particularly those who are seeing titanic shifts in the products they used to produce and deliver that are no longer in demand. And so those are the places where they have to do some extreme effort to help do transformation and recreate their future for their citizens. Does that make sense?
Thank you. Professor David Smith, what's your concluding remarks for today?
Wow. I love the question that was asked by her of what can you say about job losses and how the underskilled are finding it harder to find jobs. That is the key to the future jobs, belief, is the concept of lifelong learning. The concept that this learning is not just the responsibility of the individual, it's also the responsibility of the corporations that are employing people. It's the responsibility of education, tremendously adapting and changing to understand that it's not all about going and getting a high school education, a college degree, that this type of learning and relearning and upskilling will continue to happen throughout the person's life. And education, universities, boot camps, and others have to evolve to address that. And government has a very important role that most governments do not understand. It's not just pure economic development. It's how do you create the environments, the skills, competencies, capabilities, and the resources that are required for your citizens and your country to be successful on the global stage. Because we do live in that global environment that is connected by massive, almost ubiquitous digitalization, by ubiquitous communications and connectivity. And the fact that all of these are interrelated, which makes it particularly hard for developing nations to understand these very complex systems and these very complex problems that in many ways are governed by complexity theory. And you've heard me talk about systems of systems. Most of what we're talking about on today's program, Sharif, is governed by an approach that they are all working in systems of systems. And very few governments and very few corporations and even universities have come to the understanding of what is their role in the systems of systems world and how can you change and adapt what they're doing to solve the wicked problems that these are generating globally and to be successful in doing that. I, for one, am optimistic that we're seeing it. The changes have been a little bit slower than I would have liked them to see, but I am seeing the precursors and early trends that show we're making effort across all of these. And we're doing these all also in the light of understanding the ecosystem differences we have, the cultural differences we have, the generational, tremendous generational differences we are working in today. And that we do need to look in a time where sustainability in the future of our globe is also part of that equation now. And all of these have to come together. And you can see just the little list I've said in the last couple of sentences is extreme. Each one of them by themselves is complex. But when you look at them in the system of the future work and the future jobs and the future companies and governments and universities, it becomes even more of a tough problem to solve. And that really at the core of it, Sharif, is some of the concepts of your show today. Is we have to not just think it's going to happen, but we have to work to make it happen to address those changes. We have to work as individuals, companies, governments, and universities in education to enable the concept of lifelong learning and see and help people who are employed and looking for jobs and looking how to start new companies and things see their place in being successful with this as they look at the future. And I know it's tough. I have many friends who are still out of work and have been out of work for a while. And they're now understanding they do have to reskill, they have to upskill. They might have to change an industry they grew up in and go to a new industry where they will have to learn stuff afresh again and be able to do all that. But that's the necessary things to be successful today in the future of jobs and the future of work. And again, I'm also going to say the future companies, because the future job and the future work and the future growth of companies and governments are tied together at the hip, and you cannot have one without the other. So that, Sharif, is some of my concluding remarks. I see that we've lost you, but this is such a globally important question that it really requires a diversity of opinions, a diversity of how all the people in that technopolis, and the technopolis again is the government, the corporations, and education. What are their roles? How they can work together, and how the technopolis can come together to help solve these problems on the future of jobs work. And again, yes, the future of government, uh, corporations, and education. So, Sharif, that's kind of my concluding remarks. And Sharif, are you back with us?
Joining to the session. Okay.
So, thank you.
Yes. Thank you. Thank you, Professor David Smith. Thank you.